Welcome back to Talking Insights, the podcast where we explore the intersections of market research, public opinion, and democracy. We started this year with a new series called Polling Around the World. And after diving into the history of polling in the United States, we now turn our attention to the UK and Europe in general. And today we're thrilled to have Tanya Abraham joining us. So thank you very much for being here, Tanya.
Thanks for having me.
Tanya is the Research Director of Political and Social Research at YouGov. And from the little description that I went and looked online from you, you worked in the UK's general elections and referendums since 2014, and you worked with a range of academic and non-governmental bodies, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and UCL. So you have a lot of expertise with the UK and the UK polling and everything, right?
If you say so, sure.
Right. So my first question was regarding exactly that, because the UK has a long history of using polling as a way to understand public opinion. And can you share a bit how polling first gained prominence in the UK and how it evolved over time? Do you know a bit about the history over there?
Yeah, historically, polling has been around for a while now in terms of relative terms, and polling in terms of politics has been really useful in terms of showing what the public think about the certain subject of who they would vote for in an election. And more generally, polling is, I guess, the best example to show what the public think about and how representative the sample is. Traditionally, it's been used for elections, so how people would vote in an election, in a general election in the UK. So that is to vote for the Prime Minister and the governing party of the United Kingdom. And more recently, it's kind of been used for more consumer products and projects. So looking at public opinion of what people think about various goods and services, what their preferences are towards different, policies and strategies. So it has kind of developed from not just into that, political sphere, but really it integrates into many different types of sectors and products these days as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, when we talked about the UK, the United Kingdom, we have to think about all the different places that encompass the region. And from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, how do pollsters navigate this difference and the different areas to ensure that we have representation from everyone?
Yeah, representation is the absolute key for making sure that polling is accurate and useful as well. Over time, it's developed from, postal votes, straw polls to telephone polling and now online polling. And with each type of method, there are the pros and the cons. There's also no kind of golden magic strategy that each can say they have, because there are pros and cons to each methodology. When we look at how to make a sample representative, we have to think about the types of demographics and the types of things that we need to ensure would make a representative sample. So things like age and gender and region are really obvious ones. In the UK, obviously, we have different kind of countries within the UK that make up the country as a whole. So even taking account of things like, at least from a political perspective, things like how people voted in the last election, their education level, their political interest, all of these things kind of integrate into an overall strategy to make sure that we're trying to be as representative as possible. And the interesting thing about polling is that it's an ongoing process. There's always methodological improvements and changes that we have to be looking at and taking account of and implementing to make sure that the sampling and the kind of different demographic groups are as they should be to make it as representative as possible.
Right. And that also applies to the young generation, to the young people, and how they see the political and how they see the politicians in general. I can imagine that it can be interesting and in some cases difficult to capture those voices, right?
I think previously those harder to reach groups such as, young people, even older people at the other end of the spectrum was quite a challenge in terms of online polling because, 20 or so years ago, online polling was kind of just coming into people's recognition. People kind of had heard a bit about it. But internet penetration, even in the past kind of 20, 30 years, wasn't at the point where it is now. So reaching the right types of people, including young people, is one of the challenges that we have had, but is improving over time. And obviously at different ages, there are different kind of perspectives that you have as you get older, and how we kind of navigate that, how we control for that is something that we also look into when we take account of sampling and methodological changes.
And does like the new age of internet, the new age of technology kind of helps with that task of reaching the new audiences and the new younger people?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly helps from internet penetration perspective, because, almost all people across the UK have some type of access to completing a survey online, whether it's through their desktop or their smartphone, for example. But of course, there are the other challenges of, fraud and bots and AI that we also need to take account of. So there's always something that's kind of being thrown into the mix of different transformations and developments that we have to keep an eye out for. So while technology obviously is a online pollster, YouGov relies on, internet usage and access. Those developments, help us. That's what we're built on. But equally, we still need to be on the lookout for those challenges and how to navigate them.
Yeah, that's interesting because, like, again, like every advancement or every new way to do things kind of has his own setbacks and his own full setbacks. I was going to ask about the GDPR and like how we nowadays talk about the European Union and how the privacy concerns are everywhere. I was going to ask like how, and since we were speaking about the digital tools and internet, how does the privacy concerns touch point on polling, especially in the UK?
Yeah, it's a crucial point, actually. And trust from our panelists is key, because they're often answering surveys that are, sensitive, socially sensitive topics. Online polling lends itself in a good way because we're able to remove that kind of interviewer effect that can sometimes happen during surveys. For example, if you're having a face-to-face interview about your political preferences, the respondent might not be really, feeling able to really share how they feel on such a sensitive topic. Whereas the online polling method removes that kind of sensitivity and that kind of privacy element. But equally, when it comes to GDPR, like you said, we have to follow the rules and regulations about what we can expect respondents to answer questions about. We have to provide them with the appropriate options to skip certain questions if they're on a certain topic that fall into those kind of groups as well. So taking account of sensitivity, about privacy, about the legal aspect of those things as well is something that we also need to take account of when we're creating surveys, checking surveys, and also fielding surveys for a wide array of clients that we have.
Is it increasingly more difficult to create surveys nowadays because of all the barriers that we have to take care?
I wouldn't say it's more difficult. There's such a wide array of subjects or topics that you can cover with polling, but obviously having to follow guidelines means that we are restricted in some ways. But I think it's how you ask the question, making sure that the questions are accessible, clear to the respondent, have all the appropriate answer options. The respondent still has the option to answer the question if they so wish. So it's giving the respondent the kind of ability and the power to be able to make those decisions. And if they feel comfortable, they will. And if they would rather skip those topics, then that's up to them.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that's something that it can be used in some other parts of the world as well. Like it's something that's it should be used in some other parts of the world, especially. Obviously, we cannot talk about polling in the UK and politics and not mention Brexit. And my question was, what was like the biggest and I believe you've been working also with that referendum as well, right? So what was the big takeaway that you learned as a pollster or in the industry learned from that event?
I think that period of time really showed that it was such a divisive topic, and something that we're still kind of seeing in the past recent elections that have followed that in the past kind of, 8 to 10 years most, because those two camps of whether you voted to remain in Europe or whether you wanted to leave Europe, there were such kind of defined groups that it filtered down into many other kind of views and topics and even demographics. Some of the takeaways that I got from that were, even it seems obvious now, but things like, immigration and healthcare and the economy, all of this could be filtered down into one of those two groups. So it was such a evocative topic for many people that even with the result, when it was almost, a 50-50 result that we saw in the referendum, the fact that even in our sampling and current methodological kind of setup that we have in the UK for political surveys, it's still something that resonates as a view that we need to take account of, because those views are so strong and how it kind of filtered down into those political parties and what it suggested and how it influenced people's views. So, along with age and education at the moment, those views are what really kind of shaped people's opinions at the time and still does to an extent at the moment.
Do you think those, and this is like a kind of a personal-ish question, but do you think those moments and those kind of events kind of shape the way that the audience and the public audience kind of sees skepticism and create some kind of skepticism against polls? And if so, how can we work around it, and how can we regain the trust of the public in general?
Yeah, I think the industry as a whole experienced a few challenges in the past few years. And like I said before, public polling, when it comes to how people voted would want to vote in an election, is really the only kind of real life example of where we can get public opinion of a topic, because we have something to test it against. Obviously, there have been a few, elections where pollsters of the past and even more recently didn't quite get it to the point of what the election was showing. And I think that it just highlights the fact that this continuous need for developmental methodological changes and reviews need to keep going, not just in an election period or post-election period. It's something that needs to keep going to make sure that we know we are confident in taking the views of the public and talking about it in a wider.
Right. And so I saw a study on the YouGov that you published, and it was about the deadline to register. I think it was one of the last articles that I saw in the website. It was about you did a study about how people saw the registration, and some people 2 days from the election, they still didn't know that they could register or not. How do you sense that political knowledge is in the UK? Are people generally aware of these details? Do they know it?
Yeah, it's something that is a really good kind of question, because it touches on a couple of things, really. Firstly, in terms of the sampling more generally, we need to make sure that we are asking the right people, the right proportions of the right people, the questions. And by that, I mean, for polling more generally, that tends to get more engaged people, people who are more aware of what's going on in the news, for example. So making sure that we tap into those less politically engaged people is really important. And then secondly, the whole kind of politics as a general topic isn't something that everyone is interested in, wants to be interested in. I think it's when we have conversations like this, it really kind of reminds me that, not everyone would really be interested in this subject. So it's really important to be reflective of those different types of views. I think when it comes to elections, it depends really which election you could be talking about, because I think in the past, 10, 12 years, I've been working on different elections across some elections, some campaigns have not been that interesting, not been that engaging, whereas others have been. And I think that interest kind of varies depending on what's going on, within political parties, within a campaign, and also the overarching kind of themes and topics of what's going on, whether it's, like you said, like Brexit, that really engaged people and got them thinking in a way that they may not have done before. It could be the cost of living, which was a huge issue last year, and the economy. It could be the relationship with Europe, which was a big topic in the lead up to around the 2015 and then consequently 2017 UK elections. There are different elements that kind of feed into all of that, and sometimes it can be more of a what's going on at the time, coupled with whether you're actually interested in politics or polling more generally.
Right. And I know that you're UK based and you mostly work with the UK political pollings and everything. How do you sense that is there a big difference from the European in general, the European polling versus the UK polling? Is there a big difference between those two?
Well, I guess Europe is quite a wide base that you're asking about in terms of the coverage there. I would say that polling in Europe more generally, I guess it differs depending on which country you're really asking about. Most countries in Europe have some kind of polling capacity. Obviously, the smaller ones, smaller countries is something that is always very tricky to do or really impossible to do, at least from an online perspective, because the possible sample or possible panel of people that you're wanting to reach is so small. Other places, I think, regardless of that size, the internet connection issue, the internet penetration element of things isn't such a problem anymore. So I think it comes down to sample requirements and the methodology that is used, because each country has its own kind of demographic makeup that will have an impact on what's required for a representative sample.
Right. Well, I have one last question that I like to ask at every guest, which is, from your experience in working in the things that you work on, can you name like one project that you're really passionate about, that you I don't know, that you're really proud of it?
Well, you get one project.
Well, yeah, you can have three, but
I think I like the kind of cross-country projects that I work on, which is more of my focus in the team, because it's always interesting to see how views differ between countries and change over time. So anything to do with social development issues, international aid is always something that I find personally quite interesting. But then on the other side of things, very UK specific, when it comes to elections, it's always so interesting to dive into the MRP models and the polls that we run, maybe when we have TV debates. So know what the public think about how political leaders performed at TV debates is always quite interesting. Yeah, kind of two variations there, election specific projects and kind of the cross-country international ones as well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time, actually. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Talking Insights. A big thank you to Tanya Abraham for sharing your expertise on polling in the UK and honestly to give us such a fantastic look into the role of public opinion and how it kind of sometimes shapes democracy in that way. Next week, we're heading to Asia, where we'll explore exactly this, the challenges, the opportunities, how it is to do polling and market research in the region. It's a great episode. But before we go, I just want to remind you of Esomar Citizen Insights Summit. That's going to happen next month in Brussels. It's a great way to connect with leaders and innovators in the market research industry. I will link everything in the show notes so you can find all the information and register for the event through those links. From me, thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review. We do read all the reviews and we try to implement as much of the suggestions that you give on the show. So yeah, thank you very much and I'll see you next week. Bye.